Okay, good afternoon and welcome to another 10-minute takeaway with Silver Shemmings Ash. This afternoon I'm speaking to Laughlan Steer. Good afternoon, Laughlan.
Hi there, Julie.
And this is a further follow-up to Laughlan's ongoing series on renewable energy, seminars and articles and vlogs that he's done. And this afternoon the topic will be hydrogen fuel cells. So what is a hydrogen fuel cell and how does it work?
Well, it's a good question, Julie, and we need to start at the beginning with these things. And I know this was one of the key questions at the end of my lengthy talk, the last one I did. So we're answering the clarion call and we'll be touching on the fundamentals today. So what is a hydrogen fuel cell and how does it work? Well, it's an electrochemical device that combines hydrogen and oxygen to produce electricity. And the byproducts are simply water and heat, so notably very different to traditional combustion. In its simplest form, and we can get quite complicated, and we may well do in the longer talk, but just for the purposes of today, it's a single fuel cell which would consist of two electrodes, being an anode and a cathode, with an electrolyte between them. The anode, the hydrogen you've got, reacts with a catalyst, and that creates a positively charged ion and a negatively charged electron. The proton then passes through the electrolyte while the electron travels through the circuit, creating a current. And at the cathode, oxygen reacts with the ion and the electron, forming the water and the heat, which are the two byproducts. So the source of hydrogen fuel cells is, of course, hydrogen, and this is what gives the fuel cell its name. But of course, there is no actual combustion involved. And I suppose in terms of the history and how this has been used, hydrogen fuel technologies aren't really that new. In fact, a hydrogen mixture was widely used for gas in street lamps back in the 1800s. And the first such fuel cell was invented by a fellow called Sir William Robert Grove. In the mid-19th century, he was a lawyer and a scientist, and he called his device a gas voltaic battery. So just a bit of history there for the listeners as well.
Okay, that's a real catchy name.
Indeed.
So what sort of fields have already adopted or are looking to adopt this technology?
Well, there are three main fields that I'll touch on today. Aviation, automotive, and we'll talk a little bit about the construction sector as well. So in terms of aviation, you've got the battery power sort of set up there as an alternative as well. And although battery powered electric propulsion also offers the promise of cleaner and quieter skies, the commentary generally is that actually the battery technology isn't quite there to power aircraft. So in terms of how hydrogen fuel cells would fit into that, so they've got better durability currently and range for aircraft than electric batteries would. And of course, hydrogen is one of the most abundant, well, it is the most abundant element on Earth. And I suppose it's that allure to the industry which creates a cleaner fuel, and of course the need to reduce carbon emissions can be dealt with there as well. Now, interestingly, there is a Californian company which is really pushing the boundaries in this field, and I'll discuss it in more detail what they're up to during the next feature-length talk. In terms of then the automotive market, well, commentators are saying that vehicles with hydrogen fuel cells could eventually overtake battery-powered ones because of the ability to produce, of course, much like with the aviation, a more environmentally friendly transport with the almost unlimited green energy of hydrogen. That is what the keen supporters would say, that there are substantial challenges that need to be overcome before there's a wider uptake of hydrogen and hydrogen fuel cells powering vehicles. At the minute, battery power is looking like a stronger contender, and perhaps unsurprisingly, when quizzed on this subject, Elon Musk described the alternative as fuel cells rather than fuel cells, which I thought was quite funny. But of course, we must remember he would say that, wouldn't he? So I'll discuss in more detail in the feature-length talk the pros and cons of utilising hydrogen power for vehicles, and indeed the issues with the production and storage in that process. Suffice it to say that if anyone remembers the old Top Gear episode with Jay Leno and the hydrogen-powered Honda Insight, the sort of viability on a wider scale is not currently as great as we'd hoped, as much as he was singing the praises, and I recall James May doing so as well. Now, I don't really want to paint too much of a gloomy picture here. There are some real positives in terms of hydrogen fuel cell for cars. You're looking at things like the fueling time. It would be similar to conventional cars, rather than the hours and hours it takes to recharge a battery. As I've said before, zero harmful emissions, and I think this is particularly relevant given the real concerns with the nitrogen oxide emissions from diesel engines. And of course, hydrogen fuel cells in cars could produce a similar range to conventional motor vehicles, which is a big thing as well. Of course, battery is currently limited in that respect. And they're very efficient too, far more so than traditional combustion engines are at extracting energy from petrol or diesel.
Okay, and what about construction? Has there been an uptake of hydrogen as a fuel there?
Yeah, so there has been, and there are definitely some applications. Now, I mentioned in my last talk about the family with the hydrogen home, and this is in fact Europe's first off-grid solar hydrogen-powered house. It's very interesting to look at and to see what they're doing, but it's not going to be for everyone. It's a rather ambitious project, and not least of all, the price is something of a stumbling block. We're looking at about £500,000 for the improvements that they've made to their home. So yeah, it's a fairly hefty sum. So we'll take a little look about their grand renewable plan, and they've actually set up a consultancy as well to advise others, but no doubt people are waiting to see how they get along. So what have they done in their house? Well, this is all very interesting. They've got loads of, well, around 70 PV, so photovoltaic solar panels installed to generate electricity. And this then, it goes into an electrolysis plant in the house, which is a little bit crazy, which creates hydrogen for their usage. So that's then collected and stored at a high pressure and used to, I know alarm bells potentially, but hopefully no catastrophes, and used to heat the house via a hydrogen boiler and a fuel cell, which then powers the house. So it's a really impressive way that they've managed to create their own power system there. Any spare fuel as well is going to be used as a fuel for their hydrogen-powered cars that they're looking to get. Well, I don't think they've got those yet, but that is their plan. So I hope it all goes well, and it's certainly something that I'll discuss in more detail and that we will be monitoring closely too as the project develops.
Sounds fascinating, actually. I look forward to hearing the updates about that. And talking of updates, have you, renewable energy is always in the news, and global warming, etc., etc. Have hydrogen fuel cells been in the news much recently? I don't recall hearing much sort of news about this form of energy.
Well, I mean, that's partially due to the subject matter. I mean, the sort of platforms reporting on, apart from the House, which got into the dailies, but the sort of platforms reporting on hydrogen fuel cells generally are the sort of things you might expect to see as a guest publication on Have I Got News For You. So I think most people can be forgiven for not being fully up to date. So I think by way of flavour, just a couple of headlines that jumped out to me, just to mention a few. So in South Africa, they're actually using hydrogen fuel cells in hospitals to deal with the present crisis as a power source, which I thought was very, very interesting. Another interesting aspect, in terms of the evolution of the fuel cell itself, is you've got scientists looking to develop an alternative to platinum. Now, of course, that's a normal component of the fuel cells, and it's obviously very expensive. So they're hoping to reduce the costs in that way, and of course, then kickstart a wider uptake there as well. So good luck to those guys, and we'll be looking at that certainly as that develops. And another one that just caught my eye was BMW have, interestingly, of course, unlike Tesla, reaffirmed their commitment to hydrogen fuel cells in respect of their powertrain portfolio, which they say they're looking to welcome it into that, and have reaffirmed their commitment, as I've said. So there's quite a lot going on, and we'll look at these obviously in more detail during the talk. And this is a very diverse area. So thank you to the person that raised this as a question, as clearly has a lot to discuss.
Excellent. Okay, and the next seminar on renewables will be on Wednesday, the 24th of June, 5 p.m. We'll be exploring all of this in much more detail. I look forward to hearing more about that, particularly about the house. That sounds very interesting. So thank you for your time, and thank you for sharing that with us, Laughlan, as always. And we will see you soon, and if not before, on the 24th of June. So thank you. See you soon. Take care.
Bye-bye.